Okay, I'm going to start today's 5 frames from with a confession, and that is that I really love Vertigo. I know that might not be popular with everybody, and certainly when I screen this in class it gets a very mixed response, but I genuinely love this film. I think there's so much going on and so much to talk about. So in 2012, Vertigo was voted in the Sight and Sound poll to be the greatest film of all time. And as I say, this does get a very mixed reception. Lots of people can't understand why it is the greatest film of all time, but there's so much in this film, and hopefully through the frames that we look at today, you'll start to think about some of the ideas and themes that are worth considering. When Vertigo was first released, it really did get a mixed reception from critics and audiences at the time, and one critic described the plot of the film as having an eggshell thinness, whilst others said they'd seen all of these techniques that Hitchcock had used in this film before, but they'd seen it better before, and this time it felt very slow in terms of pace. Others sort of said that the big reveal that happens sort of 2/3 of the way through happens at the wrong time, and why does Hitchcock do that? So it faced lots of criticism, but over time it's generally become more and more appreciated. So my first frame is from the very beginning, the title sequence, and how can you not love this title sequence? This series of extreme close-ups on this woman's face, this woman that we never see the whole of, just these very fragmented shots that give this woman a sense of mystery, a lack of identity. We never find out who she is. Is she the real Madeleine? Is she someone else? Eventually we end on this extreme close-up of the eye, and as we focus on the eye we start to see the spiral, the first of many spirals that will appear in the film. And the spiral shape I think is a really interesting choice because it is such an unstable shape. If you think about it, there's no centre to it, and it's got this potential to go on and on forever. So this kind of spiralling out of control is something that comes up in the film, but also again this lack of solid structure. You know, no one is who they seem, and identity, again, is a big issue. Now, although we're looking at a still here, we can't forget the music. The soundtrack for Vertigo is magnificent. And again, in the music itself, it repeats this idea of the spiral, doesn't it? With that a continual loop of sounds over and over again. I think one of the other things to point out is that this woman appears to be largely emotionless, apart from actually the eyes, and the eyes sort of dart from one side to another. She looks frightened, she looks scared, as many of the women in Hitchcock films often do. The use of the significant colour red is something that we see again throughout the film. Here Hitchcock introducing some of the key colours, and obviously here it's about a warning. My second choice of shot comes from when Scotty goes to see Elster, his old college chum. And this may not seem like a particularly special shot, but I've chosen this because it shows the power relationship between the two of them. We can see a low angle shot here. We can see Elster in the back of the frame towering above Scotty as he considers what he's being told by Elster. And this tells us, you know, Elster's position and Elster's ability to sort of manipulate Scotty and get him to believe the story that he's telling. One of the most interesting things I think about Vertigo is the exploration of masculinity, and we could argue that Scotty is emasculated right from the very start. When we first see him running across the rooftops, he's unable to keep up with the other officer. He's the one that causes the death of the policeman because he can't jump the same distances. And then of course later on when we see him in Midge's apartment, when he's wearing the corset, he also swoons in a particularly feminine way. So I think here this image is about contrasting Scotty and Elster, and again just showing Scotty's lack of masculinity. Now there are lots of readings of the film which sort of suggest that in order to reassert his masculinity he has to sort of fix Madeleine, and it's not until the very end that we see his sort of masculinity sort of reinforced. But such an interesting relationship between Scotty and Elster. Elster, of course, the mise-en-scène, all of these dark browns, these traditional colours, the traditional paintings, and again representing that idea that men should have power and should have control, and in particular over women. So once Scotty leaves Elster's office, we go into this kind of non-speech section where Scotty goes to see Madeleine, goes to find out about her by observing her at Ernie's, and we are introduced to him sitting at the bar. He turns his head and then we see the camera searching out Madeleine, this character, this mysterious figure. And I've chosen this frame because we can only just see her at the edge of the frame, but the use of colour once again is something hugely significant. The use of the red, but more importantly the use of the green wrap, which makes Madeleine stand out from everyone else. Now, green again is a significant colour in the film. It's to do with sort of the supernatural and this ghost-like appearance of Madeleine. And as Madeleine leaves at Ernie's, critics have said that she appears to be floating out of the room as if she's already this ghost. We've got these profile shots of her as well, which sort of establish her beauty. And it's from then that we know that Scotty is smitten, actually, with Madeleine. So we know that Hitchcock was interested in notions of looking, and we could argue that this is where Scotty's voyeurism really begins. Following this shot, we see him watching her, we see his point of view. It really is very voyeuristic. Now, I couldn't choose 5 frames without mentioning Sweet Midge. Here she is pictured in a slightly bizarre frame. She's painted herself into this image of Carlotta in order to try and get Scotty to see her in the same way that he sees Madeleine. She's even wearing red, which is a colour that's associated with Madeleine or associated with danger. And here you can see she's sitting in the same sort of pose and so on. But ultimately the joke sort of backfires and it leaves her relationship with Scotty fairly damaged. Now, Midge is seen as a kind of motherly character. She refers to herself as mother a little later on. And her name is quite masculinized as well. She is a very different kind of woman to Madeleine. And of course, once Scotty has seen Madeleine and been around Madeleine, there's no way that he can see Midge in any kind of attractive way. Midge loses her appeal to him. So she's a very sad character, I think. And of course, she completely disappears from the film about halfway through. But this in itself, quite a bizarre image and definitely one that's very memorable. My final of the 5 frames, and I can't believe we're on the 5th frame already, is this one of Judy. This is such a great moment in the film. Scotty sees Judy out on the street. He follows her back to her hotel and she convinces him that she is Judy Barton. And as an audience member, we're sort of convinced too. The way that she opens the door, she doesn't respond to him, doesn't look shocked. She shows him her driving licence, things like that. She's got us almost convinced, and then there's this frame where she turns to us, she turns to the audience, and she almost makes eye contact with us, and we can see from this frame the guilt written all over her face. Now, as I said earlier, this big reveal was criticised for its position in the film, but for me it's perfect. We now know more than Scotty knows, and our alignment has changed. We are now a bit more connected with Judy. Now, for someone who was considered to be such a misogynist, I think this is a really interesting turn of events in this Hitchcock film. As much as Madeleine is passive for a lot of the film, this makes us view her in a different way. She's known all along of what she's been doing, the fact that she's been followed. And here she has a strength and begins to drive the narrative. So for me, this is such a great moment in the film, really changing everything that we thought we knew into something completely different. There are so many frames that you could choose for Vertigo. I mean, we've barely touched the surface, but I hope some of those frames there will give you things to think about. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.